And the first thing is understanding your current position, doing a financial model. How much do you spend a month? A lot of people don't know that answer. Forget about reinvention. You ask most people, where's the money go? They're like, I think it goes here. You got to know that if you're going to be making a change.
Yo, Chris, man, what are you doing? What are you up to?
I'm just helping people reinvent their lives. No big deal.
Yeah, no big deal. Look, I'm going to join in.
Cool. All right, Todd, what do we got for our reinventors today, my man?
Well, Chris, when you're running your own podcast, sometimes you can bring in a good friend just kind of because you can. And sometimes a good friend can be someone who adds tremendous value to the point of the show that you're putting out there. And that's 100% the case today. And I'm excited to have this conversation with David Mandell, a friend, a colleague, and a master financial and legal wizard who spent over 30 years helping physicians and professionals with financial and legal matters. And what we're going to cover today could not be more relevant within the reinvention conversation. We each need to have more awareness, more oversight, and more tactics in the day-to-day when it comes to our money as we move into a rapidly changing future. And before we get into all this great stuff, David, I just want to first welcome you into the conversation.
Awesome. Great to be here, Todd and Chris. I'm really psyched to do it.
Yeah, man. And, I had a chance to be on your podcast recently, and that was a lot of fun. And now you're returning the favor. And I got to tell you, man, when I first met you, I didn't know you were a Harvard grad with a JD MBA from UCLA who had written several books on wealth management and asset protection and been published in dozens of huge publications while speaking all over the world on these topics. All I knew was that it was surprisingly hard to block your jump shot. Okay, just so you know, right? But as we talked about privately, this conversation is about as important as any when it comes to mid-career professionals who are peeking out onto the horizon of reinventing or exploring new career options, or maybe even looking into entrepreneurship. So let's start there, my man, okay? Like, what's the most important first step financially a professional can take before or as they are reinventing their careers?
Yeah. And I reinvented myself, sort of how you described my bio. I started as a lawyer and then decided that that wasn't what I wanted to do full time and shifted into financial and wealth management. And along the way, created a network of lots of other firms that you and I work together on. And so I've done it. And what my advice that I'm going to be giving today, I've done myself, right? And the first thing is very big picture, and it's probably a theme, I would guess, in your podcast and in your work with clients, which goes back, 2,000 years or plus, Socrates, know thyself. And what that means is, from a financial point of view, is understand your financial position. Because if you're going to make a choice to leave a job that you've got that's steady income, or even a situation where it's not your choice, but you've been downsized or whatever, and then you're thinking about your options, you want to make good decisions around how are you going to make that change. And the first thing is understanding your current position, which is doing a financial model. What does it look like, right? We use the term in business, run rate, things like that, our expenses, our budget, lots of different ways you can talk about it. But how much do you spend a month? A lot of people don't know that answer. Forget about reinvention. You ask most people, where's the money go? They're like, I think it goes here. You got to know that if you're going to be making a change, because you may be going for a while without income, and how much do you have to cover you that way? And if you're married or you have a significant other and you have a family, that gets even more important because there are folks relying on you, not just yourself. So I think the first thing in big picture is know thyself, and where that sort of ends up in the financial world is doing a model, looking at your best case, medium case, worst case, both in terms of maybe your spending and how much you can impact that, but also how long is it going to take for this thing, whether it's an entrepreneurial thing or getting that next job or whatever it is, realistically, how long is it going to take? And then add 50% to that, right? And make sure, okay, I'm good, I can do this, because the last thing any of us want for ourselves or our clients is just overwhelming money worries, because that'll get in the middle of your plan. That'll, get you off your plan and have you make bad decisions and add a lot of stress to your life. So got to know thyself, got to be sober and realistic. And it starts with knowing where you are, status quo, and then you can make decisions on that.
Let me ask you, because you said something that I think is so foundational and fundamental, right? It's to know where the money is going, right?
Yeah,
And yet
right.
I don't know the exact percentage, but my guess would be that probably 85% of Americans don't, or
Yeah.
something like that. When you work with people, like, do you have an understanding or a theory of why that is? Because I don't think anyone would run a business and say, I'm simply not going to know my costs at all. So,
Right.
so do you know the psychology around that in any way?
Yeah, it's
Or
a great question. Interesting. On our podcast, maybe in season 2, I had this orthopedic surgeon who's down here, who's at Cleveland Clinic. So he's certainly a top guy, but he actually took time away from his practice to get a license in financial therapy. And we had a whole conversation about money scripts and why people behave around money. He's an immigrant. He came from another country. So he's like overly frugal sometimes to the point where it's actually a problem, because they're actually making enough money. But to answer your question of why don't people know, it's probably a combination of not prioritizing it and maybe some sort of maybe subconscious resistance to like buckling down. With credit cards and lines of credit and all this stuff, you don't really have to live within your means. And this is a big picture, thought. But when you're making a transition, you're going to have to, in fact, probably live below your means for a while because you want those means to carry you. So I'm not a psychiatrist to answer your question, Chris, like exactly, but I do agree with your estimate of 85%. I would say 5 out of 6 don't.
And it's interesting because, I mean, we just can't help ourselves, like understanding what the foundation, we're coaches, Dave, right? So like understanding why we're all set up not to know where our money's being spent. I mean, it sounds ridiculous when we're on this call, and that is part of why we wanted to have this episode, because in Reinvention, we want people to be sober. We want people to be realistic, and we want people to turn towards things like this that they might not turn towards. Because you said we have credit cards and all the stuff that we don't look at, right? And so that's why we have this workbook, Chris, that helps people walk through their financial plan, at least just a little bit in the beginning as they're reinventing. But Dave, something struck me when we were talking about this before as we were preparing for this episode. And you said that your recommendation is that people should understand in their mind that it takes 2 times as long and costs 2 times as much when they're making a change or a transition, right? And so I want to talk about that a little bit and how you recommend people to build that into their financial plan. Because a lot of times when you're reinventing, especially with people like us, we're very excited. We want people to go for their career. We want people to kind of marry their passion with their money making. It's like a very energizing thing. And people get all excited. And then we have this other conversation. It's like, all right, well, look, this might take a minute, right? And so you need to also do the other side of this and really kind of like overextend yourself mentally with how long it's going to take and how much money you're going to need. So from your experience, can you talk a little bit more to that point?
I have 2 thoughts on my experience. One is my brain has sort of been trained that way for better or worse, meaning when I did the JD MBA program, UCLA, this is probably true of anywhere, in law school, you're basically training yourself to think of the downside costs. What could go wrong? It's basically what it is, right? You're thinking about a fact pattern and you're trying to protect your client with a contract. You're trying to put in a contract, everything that could go wrong and cover it, right? If you're defending somebody, you're thinking of, every single claim that could come up and you're trying to defend and prepare against that. So you're constantly thinking of the downside. This is why people sometimes get frustrated working with lawyers. The MBA part, right, and the entrepreneur part, which I followed a lot of my career, is the upside, like, looking at the potential, looking at what could happen, follow your dreams, the things that you're helping people with. So my whole career, I've always been sort of aim for the best, plan for the worst, right? And so I have not been afraid of being an entrepreneur. I have never really, up until us selling our company 3-4 months ago, had a boss, but now I do. So I've lived it, right? I've lived it personally. My wife, her background is accounting. So we've had a budget from the get-go that she does. And it's like literally tied down to the dollar almost. Doesn't mean we don't make mistakes spending or we're perfect, but at least I know where the dollars are going. And so I've known in my own career, as we built our firm, that it does take longer than you think. There are things come up that you can't anticipate and everything takes longer. And why not prepare for that? Because if you achieve it earlier, it's only gravy. You're only in a better position, right? You can only be better financially if you sort of allocated and saved and planned for the longer period. And if you're able to achieve that earlier, fantastic. I think most of us being, in business and being entrepreneurs on this call would say it probably is, twice as long and twice as hard. But if you're one of the lucky ones that gets it done earlier, then you're only in a better position.
And I think I want to build on that too, right? I'll say, so reinvention itself, right? A year ago, Todd and I didn't know each other, right?
Right.
This was not even on my radar as something I was going to do. I was building my one-on-one practice. But because I have the runway and the financial plan, I could actually shift gears when an opportunity came up that I knew, hey, we're going to have to put in some sweat equity to build this thing. Not that I abandoned the one-on-one practice, but I put it in the back seat to focus on building this. And so I have the, 6, 12, 18 months to give to build this thing that in the long term, I think is going to be huge, right? So we can put the MBA positive opportunistic thinking onto this pattern of saying,
Right.
prepare for the worst to give yourself the opportunity to go for the best and play with house money in a sense.
I totally agree. And I think if you look, I don't have any data on this, but I'm guessing that especially folks mid-career or beyond who've done things entrepreneurially, if certainly they've had an exit before or just had a successful career early, that's what gives them the freedom to be able to do it.
Mhm.
I mean, there's so many people who probably have the idea early on or have some ideas and they, so they see somebody else do it or they just can't get around to it because they don't have that planning and that sort of, budget. And it's hard for them to make that change. So I agree with you. Like the ideal situation would be for people, in my view, like reinventing is have that budget, that plan, and then be thoughtful about what path they're going to go to. And they can make a good non-rush decision because their finances are supporting them rather than they're trying to like sort of shift it into something on the run.
Yeah. And I think it's really important because look, when you're reinventing, either you have a certain amount of money in the bank that can support, like Chris said, 12 months, 18 months, or you don't, right? So this is why this is a sobering conversation. It doesn't matter what the situation is, but you got to turn towards your reality and you got to look at realistically, what can you do and understand that reinventing, especially if it's a bigger shift into something new, that it's not going to happen overnight. And we don't want to have pie in the sky thinking all by itself, because I'd say on our podcast, like a lot of it is like, well, let's go. Like we're very motivating, wanting people because we think it's necessary. Like the world is changing rapidly. But I want to ask another question here around, you had mentioned that it's very important to have, like, especially if you're married or you're in a family or partnership around those people that are closest to you around your financial matters, when you're in transition or reinventing, right? So getting spouse buy-in if you're married or like having those open conversations. Now, I know you're not a therapist, right? But I'm sure this comes up, when you are helping people along this matter. And so that's the first part of the question. But I also would love you to talk about the value of getting a professional, a financial planner, that a lot of people don't have, because I think from my experience, when I was doing this with my wife and we were having stress around it, right? Like we weren't seeing eye to eye. When we did bring in a financial planner, it made it actually a lot easier because now there was a third party that was sober, that was smart, that was professional, that we could both kind of trust. And that actually allowed us to kind of move forward and make decisions faster. So talk to us about that, the value of getting buy-in from your family or your spouse, like really opening yourself up to your inner circle, and then the value of getting a professional on your side that really does this.
Yeah, I mean, if you're married, you have a significant other. It's absolutely 100% in my view a necessity. That doesn't mean they have to be 100% on the page, but you got to have those conversations. I think of my father, who was a physician, in a radiology practice for 30 years, partner, and then they transitioned. So a lot of it really kind of forced on them for some other reasons to go into what's called locums work, where you're basically a contract worker, a 1099, and going to different hospitals and like traveling around. Well, that meant all of a sudden, not just being in one place, but my parents had to actually travel. This is after we were out. And when I had interviewed my dad on our podcast about that, he'd said like getting my wife, on board was, the difference between making it happen or not. Now, a lot of folks you're consulting with might not have to reinvent into something where they're traveling or moving, but the same thing because the finances are typically joined, especially if you've got kids and you're working together on that. And to your point, one of the values a financial advisor can bring is that third party, neutral, no emotion about it, seen it 1,000 times, like this is what I'm seeing. I understand, your feelings about it, I understand yours. Here's what the numbers say. Let's get real factual, sober, as you guys like to say. And I think that feedback from a third party who has no skin in the game can be really helpful to manage that and kind of come to a common ground, whatever that is. That could be if you're thinking about doing X, well, is there a way to do X on a part-time basis? Is there a way to straddle it so you're not all in? Maybe that's what comes out of that sober third-party advice. Or maybe it is, hey, you can do this, but you've got to cut some expenses. And, spouse who's looking to do this as your part of the career, more expenses need to come from your piece. Less golf, Dave. That's what it would be in our conversation, So that's a really important resource. Some couples can do it without. I'm not saying it's an absolute must, but for many, I think it's very helpful to have a third-party professional who's experienced.
When you say financial advisor, at least for me, and I think for a lot of people, the first thing that pops up is like the top end of like, how do I grow my retirement accounts? How do I, make the right stock picks and asset allocation? You're saying something that's more than that, right? I'm sure that's in the picture, but to me, there is a financial therapy element to this, right? So how would you recommend if we have a reinventor or someone who's like reinvention curious, as we say, and they're starting to talk to their spouse about this possibility, how would you guide them to find the right advisor to work with?
Yeah. So, I think one of the benefits of where we sit today, just to give you my experience so people understand where I'm coming from, as Todd mentioned in my bio, our firm's always been focused on physicians. That's my family. I wrote a book for doctors as a lawyer back in 1996. So, literally 30 years ago. Yeah, I'm an old man. Our clients have always been around the country. We have just as many clients in, the New York City area as we have in California. So what that meant is that the doctors who are finding us were doing it because of our expertise. And they weren't just looking across who's in the building, right? Or who I play golf with. And so to answer your question, Chris, I think there's enough resources online that people can find, like they find you guys as great coaches with the content and expertise you have, that's the world. Like if I'm a potential reinventor and I'm looking for a financial advisor who has a financial therapy element to it. And this one that I had, who's an orthopedic surgeon, does it sort of part-time for doctors. He had like 5-session or 3-session program for spouses where they took a diagnostic, they figured out, okay, these are your sort of money hangups. These are your, spouse money hangups. Let's figure out how to get through that. Not a long session, literally over a month or two. Let's figure out how we can get ourselves on the same page and save ourselves a lot of grief. And so, Chris, what I think is using the content, using what's out there that we can find through the internet, et cetera, to find the right advisor that fits the challenge I'm going through. And they're out there.
Yeah. Thank you for that. And I want to ask you something, even a little bit more personal, right? Because you mentioned before that, you're a reinventor. You had a career of reinventing, and you kind of alluded to it in the conversation that you just had your company got sold, right? So you're in a, not surprisingly, yet another really good situation for yourself, just where you're at in your career. Because we have a lot of clients who come to us in reinvention who have done really well. They actually have plenty of money. They have plenty of resources behind them. And now they're at this point of, okay, what's next? Like we talk about what's next a lot, right? And so I'm curious for you in terms of what's next, because I know you're not out of this company now. You have a contract and you're going to be there for a little time. But I know that you're starting to think about the future a little bit differently. You have some freedom in front of you and you have some ideas and you've done a lot of interesting things. But I think it will be helpful to understand how you're thinking about it, because I think it'll resonate with those of our listeners who have done well in a certain career. And then it's either happening now or on the horizon of, well, okay, I have resources and I can do stuff and I've done really well. How are you thinking about it, Dave?
Yeah. So, I think a lot of your viewers and listeners will get this. I'm sort of the in-between phase where, yes, I've had an exit, but I'm part of a company I'm very excited to be part of. And, likely for 5 years, that's the contract say, et cetera. So, but I do have in my phone a notes, ideas come across, like what would I be doing in my next phase, right? So let's just say this goes for a full 5 years. I'm 58 now, so it'll be 63. My father worked as a physician until he was 80. I am not interested in hanging it up, talk about financial mistake. How about me staying at home with my wife all day and then getting divorced because we're driving each other crazy? So that's not going to happen. I start to think about what could I do after this. It's probably completely different because just the way things go, get into the lawyer, but whatever transaction that happens next, whatever exit happens next, I'll probably be locked up and not be able to perform in these areas that the
Mhm.
company that purchases our company, which is basically wealth management, practice of law, and all that kind of stuff. So it's really kind of different things. And I'm just keeping a list of ideas. And it's too early for me to really start doing the research on it or to like spend a lot of time and effort on it, but it's there. It's there in the background. And I think those who are even more, let's say, fortunate than I am in that their whatever first exit allowed them really to say, hey, I don't need to work anymore. You know, you have the dilemma of choice in that you can do almost anything, but it's hard to then narrow down what it is going to be most fulfilling and closest to your life goals. And that's where you guys can be really helpful because I could see if really I could do anything at all, I might be sort of analysis paralysis. And,
Right.
it's a year or two and it's like, God, I haven't really done anything. And people need help with
You brought up a really, really interesting point around work in general, right? So many people are in this framework of I'm waiting till I retire or I can't wait to get out. And you actually said the opposite. It's like looking for the next thing and finding the next thing, not only just to occupy yourself. I do think it's more than that, right? I think there's a purpose and a reason for
Sure.
being that's inherent in work, but people come from different channels. But a lot of people are coming to reinvention because the work itself, the purpose doesn't really align with who they are, right? The
Right.
mission isn't there, right? And I guess I want to ask you a bit of a personal question, like
Sure.
how much of, your own success and the work you've done, how aligned was that to sort of like who you are? I know you went through a reinvention, right? So is that something that you felt like a really deep alignment to? And tell us a little bit about that, Dave.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I could say I was born to do what I'm doing because my father was a physician, my brother's a physician, my grandfather was a physician. I had the chair where my grandfather had patients come at their house, their office in Providence, Rhode Island in the 1930s when they just had food because they didn't have money, basically bartered for medical advice and care. And so, like, my mission from the beginning was to help physicians first protect themselves from liability as a lawyer, what's called asset protection planning, and then broader to everything related to taxes and finances and getting retiring and college education funding and everything we do at a wealth management firm. So when I get up and do a talk, and Todd knows this, he's seen me do it many times in front of a medical society. My first slide is a picture of my brother, my father, and my grandfather.
Mhm.
And there's a marketing element to that because doctors will say, "Hey, this guy's on my
Mm.
side. He's not just another
Yeah.
lawyer or financial guy trying to take my money." But it's true. That's the bottom line. Is it is true. I realized in a ninth grade science and biology, I was not going to be a doctor. That's just not what I wanted to do. But if I could help physicians, that would be a good calling for me. And I know my father was very proud of me before he passed away, and my brother and a lot of other docs. So I mean, there's certainly a lot of other things I could be doing in life. It's not like I'm an artist who just said, "Hey, this is the only thing that I'm here to
Mhm.
do," but it's always been a very good connection between my work and sort of who I am.
Yeah. And I want to just share a little bit on that, also a little personally, because I know you lost your dad just a year or two ago. And, obviously heart goes out to your brother, and actually, Chris and I are going to be doing an episode on being fathers or on fathers for Father's Day. We talked about that. And
Oh,
I
that's
was
awesome.
actually, as we're recording this, I was just in New York for the last 3 days helping my dad as he's getting older. I mean, there's a lot up in the air around what does it mean to be a man in this world and all that. But I do want to talk and even give you a little live coaching on this call around one particular
Yeah.
point. I can't help myself. Okay. I can't help myself. So, my dad, like you, went to Harvard, and also was born to do what he did. He worked at Merrill Lynch for basically 30 years. He was like a top analyst on Wall Street. Like he was born to do that. And he always knew that it was going to be really hard for him once he retired because he didn't know what was next. He would say it even when I was younger. And he tried, like he really tried to find different interests and stuff. And the way that the world went, he didn't get laid off, but he was basically forced to retire young. I think he was
Yeah.
58 or 59 years old. Like he was your age. the one favor that he had asked of Merrill Lynch for his years of service, that, hey, I don't want to be shown the door with like boxes. Let me walk out with my dignity. And they did. They let him do that. But still, he was forced to retire young. And I watched him really struggle, Dave, with trying to figure out what was next. And even though he knew, maybe he didn't have a list on his cell phone like you do right now. And I know that you have 5 years in this company right now where you're going to do that. But I will say, and this is a message for all reinventors or people in your boat, to turn towards that even maybe a little bit more and start getting a little bit more tactical around this idea that this is going to end at some point, right? And you're going to have plenty of resources, which is great for you, that you'll have freedom to be able to do. But I watched him really struggle for a long time of trying to find that thing.
Yeah.
I'm not trying to scare you at all, but I'm just saying, there's a lot that you can do, of course, and turn towards it more now. And this is just that message for all reinventors. Like, really think about it, because we all know as we get older, time goes by faster, and like 5 years is going to go by like this. I mean, you're going to blink and it's going to be 5 years from now. We all know this. So take it on, a little more. What comes up for you when I say that?
I think of, on our podcast, 2 docs who tell 2 different stories. One, an orthopedic surgeon who is close to the end, but he became, really interested in and passionate about wine. So he's retiring. And the way he worded it, I thought was great. He saw so many surgeons the day after they're done surgery, like they're totally lost, right? Because they want to be the most important person in the room, life and death, to, take out the garbage, basically.
Yeah.
Right. And he saw a lot of his mentors do poorly with it. And so he talked about retiring to something, not just from something. And I thought that was great language. It's not like he invented that, but that was great. And then another doc who sort of left it to, hey, I'll wait till I get there, and very frustrated and kind of like realizing, he made a mistake. So for me personally, I take your advice. I think it's like really good advice, and I am keeping my eyes open. And next time you have me back on here in a couple of years, maybe I'll have some better ideas.
I want to see that children's book. I want to see that. I don't know what it is.
Well, I've got some ideas I'm not ready to go become a DJ yet, but
Me saying this is not scare tactics. It's part of reinvention. I mean, there is a large subset of people out there that are in your situation, whether it's 5 years, whether it's 1 year, or whether it's tomorrow, that need to think about it, right? And so we've been talking about financial planning. That's not going to be so much of an issue for a lot of people like yourself. But I will say that crossing that chasm is a big deal. And this world is changing so fast. I mean, we're doing this podcast because of AI is coming in and really going to disrupt things over the next couple of years. I'm actually curious, like, do you have any thoughts on that? Is that affecting financial services at all? I mean, what are you seeing in your world with AI, and how is that being integrated?
For sure. One of the 6 partners I had was very concerned, like, we should exit soon because of, AI is coming. I'm not in a panic mode, but I did just watch a webinar that was put on by a professor at MIT talking about AI in the financial services. And they're trying to build a tool that would even have fiduciary liability, which is hard to do with a product. So that's like a big thing, and it may take them years to get there, because that involves the law and regulation, et cetera, to democratize it, to bring good financial planning to people who can't afford it. And, where companies, even like ours, they're just for clients who wouldn't fit for us, right? And for really most of the financial system, which I think, I applaud it. I think that's a great thing to do, but it just shows you that people who are very smart, places like MIT, et cetera, are working on how to use AI to not so much replace myself and my partners, but augment. Certainly, as someone in a field, and I'm sure a lot of your listeners, are hearing the same thing. Hey, this is going to come help you do your job better, but there's got to be some factor. People are thinking, yeah, but it also could help make it so I'm not really needed anymore, right? Or there's a lot fewer of us needed. We used to need 5 wealth managers for 500 clients. Now we only need 2 because AI does so many other things. So has it really replaced? No, but it's replaced, in that example, 60% of the workforce. So it's big, it's coming. I'm sure it's in every industry, and finance is not immune.
There is a theme we've talked about on this podcast that I think you tap into there, which is that what I hear from that, if I'm thinking forward as to how I would adapt to AI coming into my realm. So in like wealth management, we already have robo-balancing, robo-advisors and things like that, right? But what that doesn't do is sit in the room with you and your spouse and understand intuitively who's got scarcity mindset, who's got abundance mindset, how we layer the human element on top of it. And I think this applies to almost every field we're looking at, up to and including the really technical fields, where it's like what AI can't do and maybe will never be able to do is the human aspect, the envisioning, the real true creating and connecting and intuiting. So much of this money stuff in particular is tied up in identity and who you are as a person, right? So let's talk about that human bit a little bit, right? If you're sitting in the room, with me and my wife, and we're talking about what our financial plan is, what are the maybe archetypes you run into or behavior sets you run? Like maybe there's like a sneaky thing that people miss about themselves that you often catch in these types of conversations or something, Dave.
Well, yeah. I mean, again, you guys are the experts on sort of the why, right? As coaches, I'm not, but I'll tell you one major thing, and it probably applies to a lot. It applies to many things in life, is the folks who are sort of on the do-it-yourself to delegation spectrum, right? Meaning there are a lot of people, and I think, a lot of entrepreneurship and successful entrepreneurs will tell you you need a team around you. You want to delegate. You want to go to your highest and best use. There's a reason why the surgeon doesn't answer the phone when you call the office, right? But, until AI scribes, and I had a doc talking about this just on our podcast a couple of weeks ago, most docs are still doing keystrokes. So that's not what they should be doing in a room with a patient. They should be talking to the patient and listening, right? Not listening and just not making eye contact, but typing down notes. That's changing because of AI. But, in terms of sort of archetypes, that's really important for us to understand. Because if someone's in the room, let's say a spouse, and they really want to find help, they say, we need help doing this, the investments, the taxes, et cetera. And then the other spouse is, no, I got it. I know how to handle this. I can do this. I'm a do-it-yourselfer. That's going to be an issue, right? Because there's going to be conflict there. And, there are times when doing it yourself in different pieces, and this is my personal opinion, of a wealth management, all the different tasks that go in make a lot of sense. You can save fees. No one cares more about your finances than you, et cetera. But oftentimes in many areas, and this is why I went into this, I think people would be much better off doing what they do well and managing the people, their team, right? Not just telling the lawyer, do it, and then never reading it, or not just, I'll just sign. I don't even know what's in there in the will. No, understand what's going on, but outsource and work with other people. So that's a big thing that in our world, we're trying to assess when we work with clients, which certainly it's investment risk tolerance is there. There's a lot of things, goals. I want a second home. I don't. I want to send the kids to private school. I don't. There's lots of all that, but big picture, delegation versus do it yourself is a big range. It's important for us to understand.
Can I ask a little inside baseball question? I have a very good friend who's a physician, right? And I've heard this about, do you find with doctors that you run into that DIY mindset sometimes of, these are very smart, very accomplished, very successful people. Do they sometimes overextend to say, I can do everything? And is that something you've had to encounter or
Oh, for sure. I mean, if I'm in a room with a bunch of other wealth managers and everybody has their own niches, they're going to say, why do you work with doctors? Oh, such a bad thing. I think they're the smartest people in the room. They don't listen to you, et cetera. We've developed a niche, and certainly it's self-selected. We have, 1% of the physicians in the country. So, people come to us are looking for advice, et cetera. But I'll tell you a story, down here, an orthopedic surgeon who's a client of ours, he did it himself till he was about 60. And he said, the numbers are bigger. I'm too close to retirement to screw this up. My spouse has been on me for a while. I need to hire a firm to help me with this. Now, from an investment point of view, he still manages a piece of it. He loves doing it. Fine. We have other clients who they love rental real estate or whatever it is. You don't try to change for who they are, but we do try to bring a little bit of professional discipline about it. But yeah, Chris, for us, it works. We can talk the talk and have enough happy clients that they'll listen to their brethren and sisterin to say, yeah, these guys are, going to be helpful to you. But sometimes it's just not a fit. That's life,
I mean, look, I've worked with you for 5 years, and I know the level of professionalism and trustworthiness that you have as an individual, and also your partner. I know Jason, you guys are amazing. And so if you're listening to this and you're like, yeah, I probably need some financial help or financial planning, David and his company are obviously a really good option. I think kind of closing this out, Dave, of course I want to end it with this massive appreciation. And I think what I'm getting out of this conversation is this is a time to be sober around your finances. This is a time to have like tough conversations and really look at it, with clean eyes, and to extend the timelines around reinvention, potentially around what's realistic for you to do. If you're somebody that's not fully there yet, like you are, like it's a time, at least from the coaching perspective, to accelerate that, because time's going to go by fast. And I know from personal experience in my family that it doesn't get solved overnight. Like it's not that you have an aha and I'm like, I'm going to go ahead and, create a new kind of motorcycle. That was always my dream. No, like this is a process that needs to be turned towards and accelerated. And that really is exactly what we're doing in reinvention. We have tools that allow people to envision and think from, a foundational mindset attitude. You need to have an imagination when you're reinventing, at the end of the day. And so we spurn that. And I will say, I am very curious. We talked a lot about the financial therapy, and I know you have somebody, you've mentioned this gentleman to me a couple of times. I would love to get connected and maybe even have him on the show, because I think this is the money piece, does have a massive emotional and psychological component to it. And I just love that idea of financial therapy. I think this makes a lot of sense, and I want to learn about it potentially. I think Chris does too. So let's see if we can get him on the show. And I want to thank you, for your advice. I would love to have you back here in a couple of years, like you said, and like follow and track you along personally. And also let's see how things are changing here, and let's just continue to get better with our money. Because what we're stand for is people being successful over the long term, right? And there's a lot of ambiguity and uncertainty out there, but this is a big piece, man. So you really brought it today, and I thank you, and just good to be with you.
Thank you so much for having me. I'll say two things. One is that I mentioned physicians a lot. That's certainly our focus, but I would say about 25% of our clients are not, because like they have brothers and sisters, they have neighbors who are been told about us. We've written some stuff that's in the bookstores that's not physician focused. So if you're listening to this and you say, hey, I really like what Dave said, but I'm not a doctor, can I talk with them? Happy to talk. We never charge for initial consult, and we'll put our stuff in there. The second thing is, I do take your point. Time goes by quickly. It seems like the Red Sox just won the World Series with Mookie Betts, but now that's been like 8 years. So
it's a long time.
Yeah, Yankee fans on the line,
buddy. It's a long
buddy.
time for us Bostonians. We're looking for a championship every couple of years. You know that. So I'll just end with that, Todd.
You got to do that publicly, huh? You got to do that publicly. Well, I still got like
we can
18
edit that out. We'll fix
how many
that
rings do I have
out.
on my
Probably
finger?
will.
How many rings do I got? 26 on my finger. I got a lot of rings on my finger here. Dave, man, you're the best. So much appreciation, and we'll catch you next time.